the real issue is that these laws, the Terrorism Act 2000 and the International Criminal Court Act in particular, are the most important laws that we've ever signed up. A crime of genocide is the worst crime it's possible to commit. And every time you pay tax, knowing that some of the money will go towards the war in Ukraine or Iraq or anywhere else, you are committing a criminal offence.
You are funding.
You could be imprisoned for up to 30 years.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
I invested £25,000. Today, that investment is worth £5 million.
Say hello to our hero, the Hydrogen Energy Release Optimizer. Limitless power, zero emissions.
Hi, everybody. In this video, I am joined by Chris Coverdale, anti-war campaigner, and Gordon Dimmack, who is also an anti-war campaigner and a freedom campaigner. And we're going to be talking about how we can legally, what can we do legally? Legally withdraw our tax to stop the government from spending money on war, but also to stop the government from spending money on things like the online safety bill and 15-minute cities and anything else like that. Gordon, Chris, thank you so much for making yourselves available.
Okay.
And Chris, you and I, we've done several videos together, and I'll link to those in the description below if people want to find out. But I wanted to introduce you to Gordon because he's a kindred spirit, and
right.
And also so that he can find out. I just want to spread the word about this. Yeah. So, Gordon, do you want to start by saying hi, and then Chris, you start by saying hi, and then Gordon, you take it away.
Hi, Chris. It's good. It's nice to meet you. So, I'm really excited to hear about this because I'm all about ways we can fight back against what's happening to us right now. And I'm all about, well, people have a voice, and the voice is the most powerful thing that we've got. But if you can hit these people where it hurts the most, which is in their pocket, then that's when, in my experience, it makes the biggest noise and has the biggest effect. So can you explain to me outline what it is that you think people can do to sort of stop the insanity that we're facing right now in the West?
Yes, I'll try and give a very brief intro. Back in 2002, I discovered that the British government had been conning us for 75 years about the illegality of war. So I started to try and do something about that, and wasn't very successful, even though I took a case, tried to get an injunction in the High Court against Tony Blair and others. And we reported crimes to the police and things. Now, what I discovered was that in 2001, we had passed a law called the International Criminal Court Act. Now, what this did was not only it give the International Criminal Court in The Hague jurisdiction over every British citizen, but it introduced 6 crimes into English law, English and Welsh law, and a separate act of Parliament brought it into Scottish law. And the 6 crimes are war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, and conduct ancillary to war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. And it was the conduct ancillary that got me quite excited, because when I looked at what it meant, it means aiding and abetting these crimes, and anything one does in support of or condoning, taking part in, supplying anything that leads to one of those crimes taking place is itself a criminal offence in this country. What I realized straight away was that every time I pay tax, I know that 10% of that money will be used, go to the MOD, go through the government to the MOD, and it will be used to murder men, women, and children in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, all the other places where we are attacking innocent people using armed force. So I stopped paying tax in 2003, and I haven't paid any tax since then. Now, even though it is the law of the land, the courts pay no attention to the law of the land. Parliament pays no attention to it. The government pay no attention to it. No law enforcement authorities or anyone seems to pay any attention to it at all. Anyway, I've been carrying on, and unfortunately, they sent me to prison 3 times in 2013, 2014, and 2015 for non-payment of council tax. I didn't need to go, but I didn't realize it at the time. I still trusted in a small way that the court system might work. It didn't. So in 2016, I said, I've got to find a different way about this. And I started to look at what are the systems in that the rich and wealthy and elite group at the top of this country use to maintain themselves in power. And one of them is the trust. What they do with their taxes is they put all their taxes in trust overseas and keep it away from the tax man. And so the top 50,000 people in this country probably all got money overseas in tax havens and so on. I thought carefully about this, and I thought, well, why don't we use the same system to benefit us, the taxpayers? And instead of paying all our money into it, we pay all our taxes into a conditional trust for the government or the council on the basis that they can't have the money until they act lawfully. So I started to do that, and the more I've done it, the more I've found that it is a successful and entirely lawful way of retaining money, all taxes from the government, and ensuring that they can't get at it until they meet the conditions. And the conditions I put into it are tough. One is that none of the money is ever used to harm or kill other innocent people anywhere in the world. The second thing is that I have immunity. The third is that we arrest and charge at least 1,000 of our top leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And when these conditions are met, they can obviously have the money. But until they're met, it's retained by the individual in a trust. The benefit of having it in a trust is that it doesn't belong to me, and that I don't have to, therefore, hand it over when they demand it, because I have paid the taxes. The government and the councils are the beneficiaries of the trust. And so if they meet the conditions, I, as trustee of the trust, have to hand the money over. So that, in a nutshell, is what this is all about.
Chris, do you want to say what's happened, with your council tax since 2016? You explained it to me in one of the videos we did.
Yes. Well, basically, they don't know what to do now. I put the money in trust, and what is happening is that every year they seem to sort of write it off and then start again. So every year I get a new demand. In June this year, I got a demand saying that according to our records, you owe us £312. Now, I haven't paid any council tax since 2017. So, it's just obvious that it's a system. They write it off in the books and start again, hoping that they're going to get some money from me, and they never do.
So
that's the system.
Okay, so I'm fascinated by this, because the first thing that you said there that got me thinking was when you were talking about the act about The Hague.
Yes.
This was 2002. You said that this.
2001, the International Criminal Court Act.
So this basically ties us into The Hague. This ties us into the International Criminal Court.
Correct.
Now, strangely enough, that you said aiding and abetting, or adjunctive, I think was the word that you used, which means that we can't aid other countries or entities in doing war crimes or anything of that nature, correct?
Correct.
Well, 2 years later, in 2003, the people that we did war crimes on behalf, I'm thinking specifically Iraq and Afghanistan, they passed a law in their country that meant that if any of their people were ever to be on the receiving end of an ICC warrant, then they made it legal for them to invade The Hague. So I'm curious as to why they get to isolate themselves from war crimes, but the little bully, or the little snotty-nosed kid going along with the bully, doesn't. Can you explain that?
Right,
do I understand that correctly?
I'm not sure. It's not my understanding, let's put it that way, Gordon. The best way to really understand it is to look at the international legislation that underpins the domestic legislation. The international legislation was the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, where 132 nations in Rome agreed in 1998 to set up the International Criminal Court as a law enforcement authority to ensure the laws of war and peace are upheld. And that statute has been translated into every nation, all the signatory nations, and there are now 126 nations who are signed up to it and have ratified it and brought it into their domestic law. So it's the ratification of the Rome Statute that is brought into each country's domestic criminal law. So you can't arrest somebody and try them in Britain until Britain passed that International Criminal Court Act. So the actual criminal offences are exactly the same in all 126 nations who are signed up to the Rome Statute. So I don't quite understand that it in the same way as you've just described in terms of Afghanistan and Iraq.
In 2003, under George Bush, America passed a bill that made it possible for, if ever they were on any American civil person were on the receiving end of an ICC warrant, that they could literally invade The Hague. They passed that law in America.
Yeah, no, that's important to remember that, in fact, America, although they signed the treaty in 1998, reneged on it and have not ratified it. So they are not part of the Rome Statute.
Shocked, mate. I'm shocked America, of all nations, would go back on a deal that they made just 5 years, short 5 years previous. I wonder why they would do that just before they went off and did a load of war crimes around the world. Okay, that aside, you said you went to prison for 3 times in 3 years.
Well, I was sent to prison 3 times.
So I'm assuming that this was a shakedown tactic to make you toe the line, but they haven't prosecuted you since that you've started putting it into this trust.
That's correct.
Who runs this trust for you? And if other people were to do this, could they put it into the same trust, or would they have to set their own trust?
Well, it is actually an individual trust. So the declaration and deed, what I've developed over the last 6 years is an individual trust called a declaration of sovereignty and deed of discretionary revocable conditional trust and withdrawal of consent to mandatory taxation. So it does 3 things in one go. And the first thing is it declares our sovereignty. And that's important in saying that we are sovereign individual men and women, and it's not the government, it's not parliament, it's not the monarch that is sovereign, it is us as individuals. So I am claiming my sovereignty as an individual in this document. The second thing, or the third thing, in fact, is the withdrawal of mandatory taxation. I withdraw my consent. I do not consent. Now, the important thing about that is that every time we pay tax, we give our tacit consent to the way the government uses the money. And I've been doing that for 70 years, whatever it was, before I found out that actually I should not do it. 50 years, I can't remember. So that's the second area. And then the third thing is this document enables us to set up a personal trust, taxation trust. This is for taxation only. And what it does is that you identify the amount of tax that you are being asked to pay in any one year or for past years, whatever it is, it's all mounting up. And you say, okay, I will pay this money to either the council, the DVLA, or the Revenue and Customs on condition that they meet my conditions. And there's a lot of detailed conditions, all of which are based on a knowledge of the laws of war and peace. and it's a 4-page document. At some point, I make sure that you get a copy of it so that you can see how it is based on international and domestic criminal law, making it a criminal offence for the person to hand over the money to the government unless they are absolutely certain that none of it will be used for a criminal purpose. So it's a personal trust. Now, that's fine for direct taxes, but it doesn't work so well for indirect taxes. Now, what I mean by that is, sorry, do you want to ask any questions before I go on?
Yeah, I was going to ask. Obviously, the majority of people, their job there is PAYE, and it's not a tax; it's a jack. So for the majority of people, their income tax, this is not an option for them, or is there a way that they can do it? And also, so we're talking just here council tax, but you said DVLI. Can you explain how it can be widened out and how much people can do this with it? You know
yes,
what I mean?
Actually, the wording of the document actually applies to all 230 sources of income that go into the government via councils or any other way. This money all goes into what's called the Consolidated Fund, and that has been the case since 1787. That's the way we do things in Britain. And what happens is that all expenditure comes out of the same fund. That's important in that there is no separation for different taxes for different purposes. It all goes into one fund, and we can't choose as individuals how the government is going to spend the money. Therefore, it is our duty in law not to put any money into the Consolidated Fund. So now most people, for instance, are on PAYE and national insurance. Employers are employed, and they have PAYE and national insurance removed from their salaries by their employer, and the employer passes it on to the Revenue and Customs. Now, that is a criminal offence. There's one other law that I wanted to highlight, and that is the Terrorism Act 2000, which makes it a criminal offence in this country to ask for money or to collect money or to pay money to another if you suspect or you have reasonable cause to suspect that it may be used for the purposes of terrorism. And terrorism is defined as the use of firearms or explosives endangering life for a political or ideological cause.
That is every act of foreign policy from this country in the last 50 years.
Yes, exactly. And that's really why I'm saying we have been breaking the law for 90 years, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, 50 was just what I plucked out of the air. That's the point of it, isn't it? This is, when we do it around the world, it's not terrorism, it's freedom fighting.
Well, it was until we signed the International Convention. This, again, is very useful information. I discovered that we had signed the Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism. And that is an international convention now signed by 188 nations, which says that we will not fund any act of terrorism. And it is a criminal offence if we do, for the individual. And now 188 nations have ratified that, including America, nicely, and certainly Britain. And we ratified it in 2000. So the convention was signed in 1999 and ratified by Britain in the year 2000 with the introduction of the Terrorism Act 2000. And sections 15 to 19, or 18 really, are the main criminal offences. And those are the ones we can charge our leaders with, or any taxpayer, with a criminal offence if they hand over money knowing that some of it may be used for the purposes of terrorism. In other words, by the armed forces. So there's a big difference between laws brought in by the British government because of the elite lobbying for those particular laws, and laws brought in because they've been part of an international statute or convention. And so there are two laws in this country, the Terrorism Act 2000 and the International Criminal Court Act 2001, which are the key laws that apply in 125 countries for the International Criminal Court and 188 countries for the
Oh, Chris, we've lost your sound. Your sound just went, Chris. Oh,
188 countries we got to, and then I didn't hear anything else after that.
yeah.
Sorry, I mean, this happens to me. I've told Rich about this. Unfortunately, I get a lot of interventions and get closed down.
It's Putin. It's Putin. It's him.
Anyway, so which bits didn't you hear?
We got to 188 countries.
So basically, in summary, these two international statutes mean that the same law is across 125 nations or 188 nations, and from all those other nations. And this is really the purpose of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, is to hold our leaders to account. Now, unfortunately, they've only been holding African leaders to account so far, but with efforts on our part, it may be possible to bring our leaders like Tony Blair and Boris Johnson and others to court in The Hague for conduct ancillary to genocide and crimes against humanity. So that applies to those ones, and in the Old Bailey for fundraising for the purposes of terrorism.
Chris, there's a couple of questions, a couple of things that could spring to mind, if you don't mind explaining. What power do the police have over you with regards to this? You know, do they have any power? Can they come and arrest you on based on what? And also, it sounds like this is a lot of work to set up this trust and what have you. How much paperwork is involved in this? Because I know people are not going to get involved in it unless it's really easy to do. And obviously, does it cost money to be able to do this?
No. I mean, this is the nice thing. What I've been doing is I put it all together into a 4-page document, which really just needs three bits of information put in by you and your signature and a witness's signature and address. And if you do that, you have your own trust, and you have all your taxes in trust for the government. And it comes to an end on the last day of the financial year, at which point you get the money back.
So kind of like, I'm seeing that there's a group of people that I follow in sort of like the activism world called Palestine Action. Yeah. And what they've been doing is they've been smashing up properties by a company in this country, allegedly. I should point that out.
Yep.
Who are making drones to be used on Palestinians by Israel in what they call in war crimes. And what they are using as a defense in court and winning is action that is required to stop us being complicit in war crimes abroad. And it's also sort of, it's using sufficient force. So it's like, yes, they smash up the property, but this is nothing compared to the damage that's been done on the other end. And courts are ruling in their favour. And this sounds like it's the sort of thing it's the same sort of thing. Am I onto the right thing here, Chris?
Yes, absolutely. The difference, that is the criminal law operating, probably under the Criminal Law Act, Section 3. You are allowed to commit a crime in order to prevent a greater crime.
That's it. Yeah, that's what it is.
I think that's Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act, 77. So it's very similar. And the real issue is that these laws, the Terrorism Act 2000 and the International Criminal Court Act in particular, are the most important laws that we've ever signed. A crime of genocide is the worst crime it's possible to commit. And every time you pay tax, knowing that some of the money will go towards the war in Ukraine or Iraq or anywhere else, you are committing a criminal offence. You could be imprisoned for up to 30 years. Now, that is the worst, the biggest sentence in English law, a 30-year sentence. Statutory, a life sentence is only 14 years, I think. So it is a very important law, and it's very similar to saying, look, it's much more important. Rather, if I break and enter somebody's house, if I see somebody committing a crime against a child or something, that gives me, under the Criminal Law Act, the authority to go in there and even if I'm charged with breaking and entering, because I've stopped a greater crime, I will be let off. So it's very much along the same lines.
But also,
and there's no doubt whatsoever that it's not like they could argue, no, we're not doing these crimes, because they are. They're doing these crimes, and there's so much evidence of them that they've locked up the journalist who told us about the crimes. They didn't. They just carried on doing the crimes and then locked up the journalist in Belmarsh, who's currently in there facing, well, no charges for no crime whatsoever in this country. Sorry, Rich, you were gonna talk.
That's
mate.
good, Chris. The question about the police. So my understanding is that this arrangement that you've created is purely a civil matter. So the
No,
police
I mean it's
no, but I mean from the council's perspective, it's not not paying the council is not a criminal offence. It's a civil offence.
exactly, but paying them is a criminal offence.
Trespass is a civil offence, right? So you can be prosecuted for it, but it's got to be on that. Is that right? They can't arrest you for it. Is that right?
I'm not sure about that, I'm afraid, Gordon. It's not really my area. I've just focused on these two areas.
Yeah, they can't arrest you for not paying council tax. And an earlier question.
Well, they did, but and there was about 100 people a year for many years who went into prison for not paying council tax, but that has stopped recently.
Right. Okay. Now, but here's this works for capital gains tax, income tax. People who aren't paid PAYE, so the self-employed. It works for LTN fines,
Yes.
bus lane violations, speeding tickets, ULEZ fines. It works for court fees, council tax, any form of payment that goes into the government coffers. So you come to me, Gordon, you say, listen, Rich, here's your council, or you went into London with your non-compliant car, you owe us £12.50. And I say, or whatever fine it is for not paying, right? I say, okay, I've set up a building site to your bank account. I've put that money, that £12.50 or whatever the fine is, in that bank account. Here's the trust documents, which is signed by a witness, which says that you can have the money. It's there in trust. I don't have it anymore. You can have the money, provided you can prove, one, that you're not violating the terms of these acts. And then the documentation references the specific references, gives the specific references and quotes from the act. And you can also prove that I'm not breaking the terms of these acts by paying you the money. They can't. Every year he gets his council tax zeroed. It's not accumulating. Every year they come again. Every year he puts it in trust with a deadline by which time you have to prove this. Otherwise, the money comes back to me.
Is there a way, right? So I'm just spitballing here, but is there a way that you can take a loan from that fund and then get the interest back on your rebate?
You don't get a rebate.
I feel like a really rich man here, and I've never been one. So okay,
Gordon, you don't get a rebate. I don't give the money in the first place, and I don't have to put the whole amount. I can put 10% in consideration of that with the trust documents.
I'm sold. I'm sold. I think we should all do
we
this.
Should. That Palestinian activist group could do it for that. People who don't want to live in 15-minute cities and don't want to pay the ULEZ fine, because I know it's also in Birmingham and coming into other places, can use it for that. People who don't want the government to get any money so they can create crazy legislation like the energy bill and the online hate bill, and they don't want.
Where does that stop, though, Rich? This was going to be one of my next questions. Where does that stop? So where does it? What's to stop somebody putting something in a trust and saying this trust is in trust because you're being cruel to bunny rabbits, or making just something preposterous? What is to stop people doing that? How far can people take it before the courts will rule that that's wrong?
That is up to the courts. You can take it as far as you like and test it. The important bit is about this is it's based on criminal laws passed by parliaments in 2000 and 2001.
Hey, we're just following your laws that you made.
But also, Gordon, the rich don't pay any taxes because they put their money in trust.
Listen, I'm not. I know. You don't have
to. Not paying taxes is a legitimate form of peaceful protest. It's what Gandhi did with the salt tax, the Boston Tea Party. Lots and lots of
Yeah.
I can't remember, Chris. You gave other examples of tax revolts, right? The Magna Carta came about as a tax revolt because the barons didn't want to pay for John's wars. So I don't want my money going to pay to create 15-minute cities. I don't want my money going to pay for killing people. I don't want my money going to sexualize children in schools.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, they've broken the social contract. I don't want my money going so the government can spy on a WhatsApp message that I sent to Chris or to you. This is not North Korea.
Although it's nearly as bad.
Well, I'd like to.
Really?
I'm hanging on.
Do you remember state TV when that old lady died a year or two ago? Okay, come on, it's nearly not as bad. I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. Not as bad.
Yeah. No,
what I discovered recently, Gordon, is that old lady authorized at least 26 wars and the deaths of somewhere between 6 and 8 million people while she was commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And it's really the worst war criminal we've had.
Well, okay.
Anyway, but that's she's dead now, unfortunately, so we can't charge her with anything, but we can carry on with Charlie Boy.
Yes, and Tony Blair. But let me share my screen with you.
Particularly Tony Blair, yes.
Yeah, let me share my screen with you. So this, by the way, Gordon, is 3Speak, which is a fully decentralized open source vlogging platform. They can't shut this down because it lives on the blockchain and nobody owns it. There's no company to write to and say, look, take this off. So here are some videos that I've done with, and I'll link to these in the description below. I've done with Chris. This is a 16-minute, 22-second video, which just goes through the process. This is a much longer interview I've done with him. And I'm going to be putting up other ones as well, right? And then what I've got the documents in the form of because Chris has sent them to me, and I've got a bit.ly link, which actually links to my Telegram, because I don't have a website, but I can send it to you. People can get it off your Telegram or off your website.
Yeah,
they can download the documents and then go through this. Now,
yeah, share it with me. I'll put it on Telegram immediately, and I'll do a little video and put it out on TikTok. I'm really interested in it. Any way we can stop this, because they're not going to stop. Not on their own. They're going to carry on and on and on and on and on until they have to stop. And the only way they're going to stop, therefore, is if we make them. And any way we can. This seems like actual activism to me.
Yeah.
Can I just add a couple of things there, Gordon? One of the reasons I've gone down this route is that I did a study of all the successful revolutions in history, and all of them, almost without exception, have a component of tax rebellion in them. So Magna Carta, for instance, was the first one where the barons refused to pay for the war in Aquitaine and said to the king, no, we're not going to pay you unless you agree to our demands.
The peasants' revolt, they actually threw the taxmen out the window. That's how it basically started, when one of them put their hand up a butcher's daughter's skirt, and they killed him. Then they went to the next village, threw the next taxman out the window, and that was the whole start of the peasants' revolts. Yes. I seem to remember.
And the same with the English Revolution in the 1640s. They introduced the ship tax. That started the Civil War. The American independence started because of the stamp tax and the tea taxes. The French Revolution started because of the bread taxes in Paris. The Russian Revolution started because of the land taxes and throwing the peasants off the land in Russia. Indian independence came about because of the salt tax rebellion that finally got rid of the British. And in Britain, there was the Glasgow women's rent strike in the First World War, which was one of the best of the lot, which 20,000 Glasgow women who were getting thrown out of their houses because they couldn't pay the rent. Their husbands had gone off to the trenches, and so they couldn't pay the rent. So they said, no, we're not having this. And they went on strike, and they brought out the ship workers. And in 2 months, the government in 1915 changed the law on the Housing Act. And that carried on until the poll tax, when Mrs. Thatcher brought in the poll tax, and there was the poll tax rebellion. So they got rid of Mrs. Thatcher. So all of this is based on a successful practices from the past that we need to repeat.
Very good. Very good, Chris. Thank you so much. And the reason why I wanted Gordon you to meet Chris is one, because he's a kindred spirit, right?
Yeah, excellent.
To make a difference in the world, end war, end suffering, bring about equality, and then also Gordon, so that your audience and that you're connected to, would find out about this and that they can pursue this. And I think the worst thing that can happen, like if I were to do this with my council tax, I have to convince my wife, right? But if I would do this with my council tax, I think the worst thing that would happen is I'd end up paying the council tax.
Yeah, that's kind of the worst thing, because it's not like you're stopped paying. You're still paying it.
I've paid it.
They're not getting the money. You're just
but
holding it in trust for them. So the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to be ordered to hand that money from the trust over. And if that means that your criteria have been met, then that's fine.
Absolutely. And they can't, my understanding is they can't weaken the whole trust system, because that would deprive the uber rich and the aristocrats of how they dodge taxes using trusts.
Yes.
Genius.
We're all aristocrats.
I love it.
Yes. Chris, thank you so much. Chris, I'll have all the links in the description below, and I'll pass them on to you as well, Gordon. Chris, anything you want to say before we finish up?
No, I just think the best thing is give it a go. People are fearful initially. There is nothing to be feared by it. The sooner you sign that document, the sooner you have given yourself a freedom pass from taxation for the future.
Fabulous. A freedom pass from ULEZ fines and other fines.
Absolutely.
Yes. Gordon, Chris, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who's watching. Comments, questions in the description below. I'll have the links to my video in the description below, and Gordon will have his links. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with freedom. This is Chris, Gordon, and myself signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Okay.